There's nothing quite like the smell of brand new army. Wow! Welcome back to the Realm. Let's go fast. Old Big Mek here, and that's right. In this episode, we are talking about new armies. So let's get into it. All right, what do I mean by new armies? Well, long story short, I've had quite a lot of time to sit around and read through my old rule books and things because I haven't really been able to actually hobby. And one of the things that has happened is all those little nostalgia parts of my brain have been absolutely tickled by what it was like back in the day. You see, even though I did start in 2nd edition, 3rd is really my hometown. I did not start playing competitively until 3rd. I didn't own my own army until 3rd. 3rd was my first rule book, my first starter set, all that stuff. And 3rd edition launched with a brand spanking new faction. Complete army. Dark Eldar. They didn't even exist in the lore until this book dropped. And it didn't stop there. It kept coming and coming. First we had the War for Armageddon, and you got Armageddon Steel Legion and Black Templars and Salamanders, which again, at that point, Salamanders maybe had a throwaway word or two here or there, but they weren't fleshed out at all. Nobody knew anything about them. And all of a sudden, here they were as a playable army. And then later on, it got even crazier when the Tau appeared on the scene with big, stompy, shooty robots. Where did they even come from? And the lore behind it was fantastic, that it was this, nascent little civilization, one single planet that the Imperium found, and they were supposed to murder, and it got missed in administrative paperwork, and by the time they figured it out and came back around to it, there was an entire empire. I thought that was just so stinking cool. And, it really reminded me of what life was like back when we got new factions all the time. And so I started doing a whole bunch of research because I really wanted to know what this was like in all of the other Warhammer game systems. And it turns out it's been good eating for everywhere but 40k. I mean, first of all, you've got Age of Sigmar that came out about 10 years ago now. Everything in Age of Sigmar was pretty much new because it was a complete reset. They literally in-timed Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and not every faction made it through, and then there were a whole bunch of brand spanking new factions, such as the Stormcast Eternals. And then moving on from there, we got Horus Heresy became a game in and of itself, and we got, 30k became this actual thing where the armies were very different, the factions were very different, and suddenly you're playing loyalist guys, and guys that, maybe we know as loyalists in 40k, but weren't necessarily loyal in 30k, right? There's a lot of fun there. And then, of course, less than 2 years ago, the old world dropped. We got Warhammer Fantasy Battles back and a refresh from there. And so I wanted to go through and see what the newest faction was in each game system and do a bunch of research to figure out which factions are the most wanted. And that's what we're going to do. So I've got 5 factions for you that are the most wanted for 4 different games and then a bonus. And then I've got my own personal selections. So grab yourself a squig beer and grab a seat because this is going to be a whole lot of fun. Let's take a look. All right, so on my list here, first of all, I wanted to go through the newest faction for each game system. And when I say faction, I mean true army, not just the newest sub-army, the newest sub-faction, things like Death Corps of Krieg for the Imperial Guard. Well, yes, they're a new regiment, and they have some new units and stuff. It's not a new army. It's still an Astra Militarum army. I want all new army. Even if it does use maybe a couple of things from another army, I want it to really be a new faction. Here's what I came up with. If you think I'm wrong, throw it down in the comments below, but I'm pretty sure I got these all on the nose. Starting with the old world, Cathay. I mean, I think this one's pretty easy and pretty obvious. It just came out. It is a brand spanking new faction. I know it exists in the video games in, what is it, Total War Warhammer or something like that. But they've never existed on the tabletop. This is the first time we've ever been able to play them as a faction, and they are glorious. I have never wanted to play a new army in a game that I don't play as bad as this. I love all of their models. I want to paint all of their models. If Games Workshop sponsored me, I would be begging them for that model set for the launch box that came out and then the second wave that came out. I think they are glorious. So it was Cathay for the old world. That's really kind of what kicked all this off. Once I got thinking about it, it was like, well, what have the other games got? And immediately it was like, oh yeah, Cathay in old world. So then I had to go and look at the other ones. Age of Sigmar, it's Skaven. And this one kind of took me by surprise because obviously being, an old graybeard, I remember Skaven being a thing. In fact, my chosen warband in Mordheim was Skaven. Yes, yes. They are very orky, even though they're furry. You know what I mean? They're really cool. I love Skaven. But I was like, man, what do you mean Skaven didn't exist? And I had to like do some research and realize that, yeah, when Warhammer Fantasy Battles became Age of Sigmar, Skaven kind of went away. And when the old world came back out, the Skaven kind of didn't come with it. So for Skaven to come out in Age of Sigmar as a full playable faction, kind of again, or for the first time in a really long time, was really, really cool and exciting. That's why so many people were so up and hip on getting into Age of Sigmar with this new edition and with that whole Vermintide launch box. And I gotta say, it's pretty darn tempting, especially with how good Spearhead seems to be in all of those lovely, lovely boxes. If I was gonna actually play a game, I would play Age of Sigmar, especially Spearhead, and I would probably be playing Skaven. So again, there's something to this new army that really gets you to break open the old wallet and spin some teeth, if you know what I mean. Okay, next is Horus Heresy. This one was a little harder to nail down because all of Horus Heresy is kind of new and kind of came out at the same time, and all of their things have been more about different armor marks. Like, for example, we just got the Saturnine box set, which had Saturnine Terminators, and then like a different mark armor of the Beakies, and then the Saturnine Dreadnought guy. And I'm like, well, that's not a new faction. That's a new armor mark, and yeah, it's like a bunch of new data sheets and stuff and units, but it didn't feel the same. And so what I think I have determined is it's Solar Auxilia. It might be the Mechanicus guys or the Skitarii, but I think they actually came out before Solar Auxilia. Solar Auxilia is entirely its own thing. It is the proto Imperial Guard, and their tanks are very, very cool, and the dudes are pretty all right, and they make for a fun Horus Heresy army, especially being that the whole thing on Horus Heresy was the Beakies fighting the Beakies. For them to even put other factions like the Skitarii and the Solar Auxilia in it, I think is really cool. In fact, I would desperately love to see all of the 40k factions end up in a Horus Heresy and just have 30k be its own thing. I do think that would be very, very cool. But that's, my own list, which is at the very end of the video. Moving on to 40k, this one is I think very obvious that it's Leagues of Votann. It's the squads coming back. We haven't been able to play them since 2nd edition, and back in 2nd edition, the game was kind of more roleplay and less army, and there was not anywhere near the armies that we have today as far as the size, how many different units and stuff. So Leagues of Votann, definitely the newest faction. Although Emperor's Children just came out, and I know that they are just a faction of chaos, and they don't really have enough right now, but there's a potential for them to kind of grow. So I'm going to give them an honorable mention. But man, really going through the history of 40k, and like I said, the history of my own, codexes and books and stuff, we got Dark Eldar, Tau and Crew, Skitarii that became the Mech in and of themselves. Harlequins were not a faction for a long, long, long time, and suddenly they're this whole army. Dark Eldar, again, for those of you that are in the rest of the world, in the United States, sometime toward the end of 5th edition, Dark Eldar stopped being sold in the U.S., and they stopped talking about them. Like, they stopped being in White Dwarf. They stopped, they just didn't exist, even in the lore. I don't know why. I don't know what the impetus behind it was. And then suddenly it came back with the whole range refresh. So it was a very, very odd situation. But yeah, there was a hot minute that Dark Eldar were squatted, but only in the States. If you were in Canada or if you were in, the UK, Dark Eldar were still there. And it was really funny, like, talking about this when I got back into Warhammer, and it was like, oh man, Dark Eldar came back. That's so exciting. And people were like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, they were gone. And they're like, oh, they never left. And had to really do some research. Like, oh, no, in the U.S. they really did. But it was only the U.S., which is bizarre to me. But anyways, moving on. Gene Stealer cults, also a brand new thing. And of course, the Leagues of Votann. Not to mention all the different, chapters of Space Marines and different Chaos Space Marines. Like Death Guard. Death Guard went from having one squad that was their own thing to being a whole entire faction, right? So all of those are brand new. So now that we know who the newest ones are for each faction, let's talk about what the most wanted new army is for every single game. Now, I want to be clear. This is not a rumor video. I don't know anything about any of these. And even though it's the most wanted, there is a good chance that this might not necessarily be the next release. This is just simply when I go and I read forums and I read posts and I watch videos, these are the armies I see talked about the most, of people going, man, I really wish they would make this. I would spend all my money right away buying this army. So let's get started with the old world. Actually, we're going to pause for an ad break because Old Big Mek needs to pay the bills. You see, he's got a merch store called theredonesgofasta.com, linked down in the description below, where you can pick up all the cool drip he wears in the videos, such as the Orktober hat and the Mordaga shirt with art by BenBam. That's right, every single piece is drawn by an actual artist, not AI. Just so you know, that web store is what keeps this whole thing going, because he's not sponsored. That's why you don't hear anything about VPNs or spaces that are square or anything of that nature. Also wants you to know that because it's that whole Cyber Monday holiday time, if you use the code CYBORG in your checkout, you'll get 15% off. 15% off of your order of soft goods of $50 or more now through the end of December 14th. And if you order somewhere before around the 11th in the US, you should get your stuff in time for Squigmas. It makes great gifts. Also keep in mind, the Orktober stuff all goes away at the end of the year because this design says 2025 on it, and we got to change the 5 to a 6 for next year. So make sure you pick up your merch at theredonesgofasta.com. Old Big Mek will appreciate it. Thanks for the shout out there, Cousin Weird Boy, but let me take the video from there. Okay, the most wanted army that I have found for the old world is Kislev. Now, apologies if I'm mispronouncing this, but that's the way that I think it's pronounced, is Kislev. Kislev is the Polish/Slavic influenced army in the old world. They were around in Warhammer Fantasy Battles. They had maybe a couple of minis or a couple of squads. They've definitely been in the lore forever, and there's a rumor that there was actually an entire army ready to go when, well, I hate to bring worldwide politics and stuff into things, especially given where I live, but you know, Russia invaded Ukraine, and it kind of made for a lot of problems with Eastern European and Slavic culture type things going on. All that being said, that army really is unique. It is fantastical. It is not real world. Just like the Bretonians don't have anything to do with the Crusades or anything like that. They're fantasy. So I think that there is room in the world for Kislev, but obviously, hopefully, we all want actual conflicts in the world to end, because war is meant for tabletops, not for real life. But anyways, the Kislevs would be extremely highly desired, wanted, would probably sell immensely well, much in the same way that Cathay has done, and especially as they lean on that Polish heritage and influence. I mean, think about the hussars that are riding the horses, and they got the great big giant winged things on the back to intimidate their opponents. Would be really, really rad on an old world board. I mean, having a charge into a brick of infantry is like what square bases are all about, right? Like, it would just be really, really cool. I know I would be personally very interested in that, although obviously I like Valhallans in the Imperial Guard. So yeah, I like my snow and my long overcoats, basically. So very, very, very cool faction. But fully acknowledging that there is a true possibility. There's been rumors, there's been like potato camera photos of models and things like that. Assuming all those rumors are true, that Kislev isn't going to come out until that real life conflict is over, and buried probably. The next most wanted one I've seen is actually Dogs of War, otherwise known as the Mercenary Guilds. And this one was really, really interesting because, once again, as an old Greybeard player, I remember Dogs of War being a thing. What those were individual regiments. They were called Regiments of Renown that you could purchase for your army, like in-game. So basically, like, say you had Empire, for example, right? And so you had your whole Empire army set up, but you needed maybe something to get you over the top. You would hire a squad, a Regiment of Renown, that specialized in whatever you needed done, which was really, really cool and super flavorful, and had some of the wildest coolest minis I've ever seen. I really did a deep dive through my collection to try to find some examples of these, but unfortunately all of my White Dwarves and all of my Warhammer Fantasy stuff from that time frame are just gone. I'm sure I sold them over the years, but I remember you would see like advertisements or, you know, the articles for them as each unit came out. There were these guys that had these wings, and so they were like drop troops that would come in. There was like this mercenary group that was like a bunch of drunkards. There was like all sorts of things like that. Kind of think of like Colonel Schaefer's Last Chancers, but for Warhammer Fantasy Battles. And so it was interesting that like I see Dogs of War as a standalone army, where people are going, hey, why don't we have like a freebooter style thing, right? Like where is, like you talk about the Grand Alliance and the, you know, Death Alliance and the Destruction Alliance, where are the people that are unaligned? Where are the people that are just like trying to defend their village, and they hire whoever they can get, whatever mercenaries they can find to just keep everybody out. They don't want any of these stinking factions in here. And it was like, you know, that actually would be really, really cool, especially in Age of Sigmar, where you've got all these different realms going on, right? And things kind of interacting with each other in this very magical, fantastical way. It would not be out of character to suddenly have these armies come up that are mercenary armies that are fighting for the highest bidder, or are kind of just doing their own thing, or like independent republics or city-states, you know, kind of doing their own jazz. I thought that would be very, very cool. So I let that one come in here. We kind of get a 2-for-1 in Old World with Kislev and the Dogs of War. Which brings me almost to Age of Sigmar. And I say almost because I thought this was really interesting, because I kept finding this same response for both games. So basically this army has gone missing from both the Old World and Age of Sigmar and is yet to make a return. People are arguing back and forth over which one it's going to make a return in, and that is Dark Elves. So Dark Elves were a really big thing in Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Like, all the editions I remember, you always had High Elves, Wood Elves, and Dark Elves, and they very much antagonized each other, and then all of the other races within Warhammer Fantasy Battles. And Dark Elves coming back to the Old World would be great. I mean, they absolutely need that foil, that black deck foil to the white deck High Elves, right? Like, it's a very cool dichotomy. But really thinking about it and reading into the Age of Sigmar versions, they'd be called the Umberanth or something like that. And yeah, they're like thinking about the Dark Elf aesthetic in an Age of Sigmar model is really intriguing. Like, that is way cool, especially as an old school Dark Eldar player. Again, remember in 3rd and 4th edition, Dark Eldar were my jam. Like, I could totally see modern Age of Sigmar sculpts as a Dark Eldar theme being wicked cool. So whether it's Dark Elves in the Old World or the Umberanth in Age of Sigmar, or heck, even both, because you could really spin them to be very different things, much like they have spun all of the armies that now exist in both games. That could be a whole heck of a lot of fun. So that was a really intriguing one to learn about. You guys that play the Old World or Age of Sigmar, let me know down in the comments. Am I hitting on these? Like, are these like cool? Would you play these? Like, is Dark Elves a thing? Because I personally think so. Like, I really, after reading it, I was like, oh, this might even replace like what's in my head of what I want, because I could really see where they're coming from. That's really cool. All right, moving on from the worlds of fantasy to the worlds of science fiction, let's get into Horus Heresy. Now, as we talked about with the newest factions that have come out, Horus Heresy being one of the newer games, period, everything in it's kind of new, but they really do need a new faction. And the number one most wanted faction for that game, by and far, this is the easiest lock in this whole list, is Dark Mechanicum. Now, Dark Mechanicum is very highly wanted for 40k as well. This is not the last time you are going to hear these words come out of my mouth, but they do make, honestly, more sense for 30k, for Horus Heresy. You see, they are an essential part of the lore. I mean, again, if you've read any of the, 57 books about Horus Heresy, you know that it wasn't just the Space Marines that fractured, that fought against the Emperor. It was also the Solar Auxilia. It was also the Mechanicus, and the Dark Mechanicus almost won the whole thing. They really were a force to be reckoned with, and that headbutting from Mars of which side they were going to be on is a really interesting take on things. So the Dark Mech would make all the sense in the world. Now, they did release some new Skitarii models that are very Dark Mech looking, but they were still good guy Skitarii. Obviously, they can just release them all as Skitarii, and then you can play them as good or bad, just like you could do with the Solar Auxilia and the Space Marines, but it would be really cool to see the specialized Dark Mech only units come out. It would be great to see Dark Mech get their own rules. It would be fantastic to see the start of Demon engines, which again, you do see a little bit in those newest models. There's that new buzzer drone thing that looks just like the Death Guard one in 40K, which is super exciting. I would love for them to go down that rabbit hole more, and I am not the only one in that boat. Again, this is by and far the easiest, clearest cut one. Every Horus Heresy thing I looked at, everybody was screaming, where's Dark Mech? We need evil Skitarii. This needs to be a thing. So that one is number 3. All right, it is time for the 400-pound gorilla in the room, which of course is Warhammer 40K. Now this one was a lot harder because most of the most wanted things I read or see or watch or listen to happen to not be all new. They happen to be takes on existing armies, or ways to flesh out existing armies, or fracturing existing armies into multiple armies. And so that makes it really difficult. I did not find any particular entirely truly all new thing outside of, again, potentially Dark Mechanicum. But that being said, there was definitely one voice that rose above the rest, and part of that is probably because there's rumors that these guys are actually coming, but I think part of it is actually because this is one of the few remaining OG factions, things that have always existed in the lore. They go all the way back to that 3rd edition rulebook, if not older. There are stories in here about this army and the units that are in this army, or how this army exists, and that is Eldar Exodites. Now, for those of you that don't know, Eldar or Eldari are the elves of the 40K world, and Exodites are their outcast, I don't want to say backwards, but just they live the idealized life the Eldari lived before the fall. And not in the like hedonistic Slaneshi way, in the like true communal with nature, living on garden worlds and maiden worlds sort of way. And so Exodites, they're the Eldar that ride dinosaurs, basically. They are, they live on just the planet that they're on. They definitely like use the webway and this and that, but like they don't have the giant craft world spaceships that go, interstellar. They don't do aspect warriors. They don't have Caleb and Chicane coming to be the avatar of the god of war. It's literally Exodites. It is a bunch of Eldar living in commune with nature, using the life around them in a positive and beneficial way. So Exodites are really, really, really cool and would look fantastic on the tabletop. I mean, think about how different it would be to have a literal dinosaur squad making a charge, but on top of them are Eldari, with bright lance, actual lances. I don't know. It would be wild. Could you imagine a squad of them running at a squad of the demon horses being ridden by Death Corps of Greek Death Riders, right? Like, it's a very 40K, very grimdark, very kind of hilarious in its, ability to laugh at itself and be like the most extreme, but in a very, very cool way. Now, getting to thinking about this, there are so much going on with Eldar right now, specifically as we end 10th edition of 40K, that I think that this one is actually the most likely to happen. And that's because there's been a bunch of rumors that Eldar Corsairs are coming. We did have the Void Scarred Corsairs in Kill Team, followed up by another like Corsair-like unit that was more like Dark Eldar. And then before that, you had the whole Ynnari thing. So there were these other like in-between Eldar guys that were kind of doing their own thing. And Of course, we also have Harlequins as their own standalone thing now. And it got me thinking, I could see them doing a Codex Outcasts, where it is Ynnari and Corsairs and Exodites and things like that, and maybe even pulling Harlequins into it in the future, and it becomes this kind of catch-all of all the Eldar that don't fit into either Craftworld Eldari or Dark Eldar Drukhari armies. And I think that that is a very strong possibility moving forward. But Exodites themselves, as a faction or as a part of a faction, would be extremely cool. Think about like how Kroot and Tau work, only more so. Kroot are very cool models. They had that amazing army box that came out, a bunch of really cool models. The problem is they don't have enough points and they don't have enough things going on to actually be able to like be a standalone army without like spamming tons and tons and tons of the same units. I fear that Exodites would be the same way. They're very cool. They're going to look amazing on the tabletop. Their launch box would be great, but the reality is there's not enough there to make a modern 2,000 point Warhammer 40k army unless you combine them with other things. And obviously, Corsairs would be coming to their rescue if Exodites made out the call for it. Not to mention, you could probably sneak in a small faction of actual Eldar as well, potentially even Dark Eldar, depending on where your Exodites stand in things. But I thought that it would be very cool to see them on the battlefield, so I very much agreed with the one. Now this brings us to number 5. I know what you guys are probably all thinking is like, Big Mek, you always go on about the big 4. How are you getting 5 out of this? Well, number 5 is cheating a little because it can actually work in every single one of these game systems. Those of you that play this army already know exactly what I'm about to say. You're screaming, yes, vindication! Demons, Chaos Demons. Let's talk about Chaos Demons. First of all, they're not new. Chaos Demons have been around literally forever. They are some of the very first OG models that Games Workshop and Citadel Miniatures made, even before Warhammer was really a thing. That is how old some of these demon ideas are. They have been able to be played in nearly every game system that Games Workshop has ever made. They were definitely in Warhammer Fantasy Battle. They are definitely in Warhammer 40k. You can use demons in Age of Sigmar, and there's no reason why demons can't come to Horus Heresy, especially the more chaotic you get. And demons have been in a really odd place for a long time now. With all of this reorganization going on of the different game systems, there's been a lot of like letting them wither on the vine, and every once in a while they kind of come back a little bit, or they get added to a codex, and you get this breath of like, oh, demons are going to be a thing, but they're not their own truly standalone thing. Ravenous hordes of demons, and frankly, as much as I didn't like demons back in the day, I think that that is a disservice to the fans and a disservice to the lore. And I actually would like to see demons make a comeback in all of the game systems. Specifically, especially being, a super duper kit basher, I would like to see demons be used in all of the game systems. Now, I know Games Workshop modern corporate structure is really crappy, and they want to separate the systems as much as possible so they can track which of the big 4 is selling what. But that is doing themselves a disservice. Because here's the thing. If I play Warhammer 40k, and I have a Khorne army, I got a bunch of world eaters, right? And I buy some Chaos Demons, that's not stopping me from buying anything else. What it's going to do is it's going to encourage me. Instead of them losing sales, they're gaining sales, because now I'm going to look at these demons and I'm going to look at Age of Sigmar and Spearhead, especially, and be like, oh man, I can like buy a couple of units, and now I've got an Age of Sigmar army. And now I'm playing 2 game systems instead of 1 game system, which means that when that new rulebook comes out, I'm probably going to buy it because, hey, I already got the army for it. And that means when a new unit comes out for Chaos Demons, I might go, hey, I can't use that in my 40k army, but since all my demons can be used in, Age of Sigmar anyway, yeah, let me get this too. I'm still doubling up on my army. You're getting me to buy more things, not less things. And as soon as they figure that out, they are going to sell tons of these things, because I think there is a lot of people that are still like that still want armies that, even if the whole army can't port back and forth, at least portions of it can. And if I could run bases of Nurglings or Pink Horrors or whatever in multiple game systems, I am much more likely to buy into those game systems or try another army in that game system or just expand the army into that direction as well, because I own models that can pull double duty. And demons are pretty much the only thing that you can absolutely get away with this in every single faction. If I have a swarm of chaos demons, if I've got those coronate bloodletter guys, they look right at home on a 40k battlefield. Like, yes, the warp opened up and bloodletters came forth. They're also going to look at home on an Age of Sigmar board. Oh man, the realms aligned and these bloodletters came forth. They're also going to look at home on an old world board. Hey, look, chaos portal opened and here's some bloodletters, right? That's what I mean, is this, they can actually go in every single setting without fail. So why not lean into it? Get people to consider other settings by already having an army or a part of an army that works in multiple things. So I think demons should be their own standalone armies, and I think that those standalone armies should be available in every single game system to encourage people to buy them. Now obviously you have the whole, square-based, circle-based thing with the old world, but realistically demons aren't going to fight as a rank and file unit in a brick anyway, so letting them be a full skirmish army I don't think does a disservice whatsoever. And again, if you wanted to have some specific units that were like old world only, maybe you've got someone like the war dogs and stuff and they're on a square base, that's okay, but having the majority of the army be available and be available for every game faction, I think would be a sales winner. And that's it. That's the top 5 most wanted armies for all 4 of the major game systems for Games Workshop for Warhammer. Now, all that being said, I do want to throw a bonus in here because we don't talk about the other smaller games enough. Kill Team, Warcry, Necromunda, Blood Bowl, things like that. They're very much their own things, and they actually do get new factions all the time because each release is pretty much a single box, or maybe 2 or 3 if you've got like a character or a hero going on. But all that being said, I did want to at least call them out, recognize that they are constantly coming out with new stuff, and it really scratches that itch if that's the kind of thing that you're into. So if you really like always having something new to build, paint, play, collect, play with, I would highly recommend looking into those game systems because every release is essentially an entirely new playable faction. And you only got to buy the one box, or like I said, the one box and a couple characters, and you're done, and you can keep going with the game. So if you're somebody that's into that kind of collecting, definitely look at them. Looking at all the different games, though, there was one thing that did stand out to me, and that is that Necromunda does not have an actual Imperial Agents faction. Now, there are, like, the Squad Enforcer guys, the Palatine Enforcers, but that's not the same. I'm talking, like, actual Imperials. So things like having an Inquisitor and his team play a Necromunda, having a rogue trader maybe and his entourage in Necromunda, although I know there are some kind of like that, having RBTs come down into the Underhive and then get whooped by the gangs would actually be really cool. Heck, even Planetary Defense Force, right? Like imagine a bunch of guardsmen that aren't even good enough to be guardsmen. Could be a heck of a lot of fun. I think that they are missing out on that. They're so focused on the gang on gang action that they kind of miss out that, like, oh, you could totally have some unwitting Imperials end up down there and get pasted. I think would be super duper cool. So who knows if we'll see something like that in the future, but that was definitely something that popped up on my radar. Okay, we've covered all of the newest factions in the main 4 games. We've covered the most wanted new factions in the main 4 games. Now let's talk about my own personal top 5 list. And this is going to come as no surprise to anybody that watches me regularly. It's mostly 40k. As much as I love all the factions and settings, I only have enough time and enough teeth to really dedicate myself to one thing, and that one thing is 40k. So most of this is 40k. There's one that's not, though. Okay, these are in order of importance. So I'm going to start at number 5, which is the least important of the most important ones to me, and go all the way to number 1, which is the absolute, I will buy the entire faction the second it comes out, no questions asked, above all else. Okay, so here we go. Number 5, we've talked about this already, Dark Mechanicum. I love Mechanicum. I love Skitarii. I love the idea of evil Skitarii even more. That is the only thing keeping me from starting a Mechanicum army in 40k or a Skitarii army in 30k. If they made Dark Mech an actual thing, I would be in right away. I've talked about this on the channel ad nauseum. No surprise to anybody. I've even collected a couple of models here and there, for potential kit bashes, and I love Vashtor. The second they announced that he could actually take an army, I'm going to go buy him. Number 4 is kind of an extension of this, and something that I actually honestly want a little bit more, and that comes from being a super long time fan of the Tanith First and Only book series from Dan Abnett. I love Gaunt's Ghosts. Now, if you haven't read them, first of all, I think they're the strongest Black Library books out there, and that's a high bar. The Horus Heresy books are fantastic. All the Mike Brooks Orc books are phenomenal. There are a ton of really awesome stories. All the Sandy Mitchell books about Cepheus Cain are fantastic. Good old-fashioned Eisenhorn, that whole series, amazing. Okay, these are very, 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 very high bars, but there is just something about Gaunt's Ghosts that gets me coming back to it again and again and again. And I think a big part of that was actually the bad guys. You see, the Tanith First and Only, they fought primarily against these chaos cultists called the Blood Pact. And the Blood Pact were pretty much Imperial Guard level of wounds, equipment, toughness, ferocity, all that kind of stuff. It was basically Evil Guard, or, chaos cultists. And the reason why that was so cool is when a Chaos Space Marine did show up, it was horrifying. It was terrifying. It was like clear your bowels and run away screaming, as it should be. And there was something about having that power level difference to really show what happens, especially as the cultists were successful in summoning a Chaos Space Marine or a demon or something of that nature, and they really, rocked the Imperial's socks off, really made for some awesome world building. And so a Lost and the Damned army, a Chaos Cultist army, would absolutely jimmy my jams, or fill me my flams, as Jay Eon's Battle would say. In fact, I love this idea so much, I have literally been collecting it as much as I can. So basically, every time Games Workshop comes out with something that's even remotely cultists or Lost and Damned or Dark Guard going on, I get my hands on it and tuck it away for the future. I just love this aesthetic. I love this, used to be a good guy, now a bad guy, or fell in with the wrong crowd kind of a thing. I don't know why. Again, I think it's those books, but it's absolutely on my list. I would love that army, even more than Dark Mechanicum, and that's saying a lot. Which brings me to my only army that's not 40k. Now, I've spoken at length on how I would love to get into the other games. There's nothing wrong with the games. Believe me, if I had the time and money, I would be into the Old World and then Age of Sigmar tomorrow. Okay, it's not that. It's just, like I said, I've only got enough time, I've only got enough energy, I've only got enough money to really support one hobby, and that hobby just happens to be 40k. But there is one thing that would absolutely positively get me to start playing a different game immediately, and that would be bringing Bretonnians into Age of Sigmar. Now, hear me out. When I started Warhammer, even before I played 40k, I played Warhammer Fantasy Battles with a couple of my neighbors, and they all had fantasy battle armies. And the army I loved the most was Bretonnians. There's something about this brick of knights, all painted different wild paint schemes, charging into these bricks of identically painted guys that, really turned on my brain of wow, this is super cool. I really want to paint all of those. Now, I know that Bretonnian has been re-released for the Old World, and believe me, I had held a box more than once and really, really, really considered it. But then I thought about it, and the thing about Bretonnians in the Old World is most of the models are the old ones, and I have built and painted the old models. I've had a couple of Bretonnians over the years. Again, I'm a graybeard. I have tons of metal orcs in my army to this day. You guys know how much I love the old models. The old Bretonnian models are not my favorite. Not to build, not to paint. not even really to look at. I like the idea of Bretonnians way more than I like the physical manifestation of Bretonnians. But when I look at the new Age of Sigmar sculpts, specifically like Cities of Sigmar and their knights, they are just glorious. They are so, so, so good. So, if Bretonnia was fully redone, like how Cathay is all new, if they did all new Bretonnian for the old world, that would suffice. I would buy it, and I would be into it. But if Bretonnia or something like it came out for Age of Sigmar, with those style of sculpts, the round bases, and like the bigger scale, and the more realistic proportions, and then having like that little bit of fantasy with it, and think about, you know, channeling like the great, you know, literary works of, you know, high fantasy stuff, you know, Chronicles of Preodane and stuff like that, like where you get just that little bit of magic, where there's some dragons involved, right, with my knights. Dragons and knights. I want dragons and knights. This should be obvious by now. Just give me dragons and knights and I'm super happy. If they did that as an army, I would be all in on a whole new army. All right, we are down to my last two personal most wanted new armies, and I gotta admit, number 2 is not actually new at all, and a lot of this might come as a shock even to you very long-time viewers. Real Imperial Guard. Now, that's not a shock. What the shock is what I'm going to talk about after this, but we need real Imperial Guard. What we have now is not real Imperial Guard. The knee-pad Cadians do not have any of the charm of any of the Cadians of old, with what little charm they did have. The poor Catachans are dying on the vine, and the Death Corps of Krieg just aren't as cool as Armageddon Steel Legion. They just aren't. Sorry, but someone's got to say it. Like, yay, shovel meme. It's just not as cool. Their gas masks aren't as cool, their lore isn't as cool, their look isn't as cool, and there's something about the proportions with being this tall, skinny human that just doesn't work. It loses the panache, the je ne sais quoi that old school Guard had. Give me Tal'Arn Desert Warriors with their crazy vehicles, with things like the Scalamander Scout vehicle and stuff like that, right? Give me like the Tropic you know, equipment added on to the vehicles to keep the sand out of the engines and stuff, right? Like that, right? Like, I want that in my Tal'Arns. Give me my Valhallan Ice Guard back. Where are they? Those are the original Greatcoat guys. They are so much cooler than Death Corps of Krieg. I mean, come on. You've got, you know, all those snow guards on their vehicles. They had the Hellhounds with the giant gas tanks on them. They specialized in flame weapons. Heck, Siphaeus Cain is a Valhallan. That entire book series is about Valhallans. Why are they not in the game? Where are the Mordian Iron Guard? I want an entire army on the battlefield in their perfect Class A dress blues, just looking to the nines, metals gleaming as they pound the enemy with artillery. I mean, it's just so grimdark and wild and cool. Give me Armageddon Steel Legion back. How are we going back to Armageddon and we don't have Armageddon Steel Legion? Where is my mechanized army that was actually different? All of these other Imperial Guard, you know, regiments, where's my actual company? Give me 2 to 6 infantry squads with a command squad that takes up 1 slot in my army, right? Like, where is that? Where is the true chain of command? All of that has been lost, and here's the part that's going to be a shock. Because all of that has been lost, I am giving up on Imperial Guard. Yeah, I know. Again, longtime viewers are like positively screaming right now because I've done New Year, New Army the last 3 years in a row, and all 3 years have just been my Imperial Guard, and all 3 years have been complete and utter failures because I just cannot get into modern Astra Militarum. It's just not the same. Now, don't get me wrong, some of the stuff is very cool. I love the Rogodorn tank. There's one in the cabinet. I've showed off a million times. I like the Valkyrie, all that kind of stuff. Casterkin, you know, refresh is very cool. I love the new the Attilan Rough Riders. They are on point. Do what they did for the Attillans for all the other regiments, and I will come back. Until then, I am done. I am selling off all of my Cadians. I am selling off all of my Death Corps of Krieg. I am selling off all of my Valhallans. Yes, I know. I just got done hooting and hollering and beating and banging about it. But the fact of the matter is, because the rules have changed so much for Astra Militarum, I literally cannot use my Valhallans in the game at all. You just can't. All of my squads have a heavy weapons team in them. If I take all the heavy weapons teams out, I have too many heavy weapons teams to run in a game, and I don't have enough infantry guys to put back together into enough squads to make any kind of points. What was a 2,500 point army in 3rd edition is more like an 800 point army in 10th edition, with things that are actually legal to use and bring. You've got other issues like all of the weapons teams are on single 25mm bases or on no base. And then all my Cadians, I had rebased them from the 50s to the 40s, and now they're back to other things. It's just ridiculous. The Sentinels have been on 3 different base sizes, 4 different base sizes if you go all the way back to the all-metal Sentinel, right? Like, it's just crazy. None of it works. It's frustrating. I don't like it. It causes nothing but bad, just negative thoughts. So I'm literally getting rid of all of them. All of my Imperial Guard are going up for sale. So if you are a big treadhead and you want some Imperial Guard, you should let me know. And let me say, my collection is extensive. Like, Rogue Trader era extensive. I have had way too many Guard armies over the years. And frankly, the new stuff just cannot match the characters. So I don't want the new stuff. I can't use the old stuff. I don't want hundreds of dollars worth of minis sitting in a display case, never to see a tabletop. Even though I'm a filthy casual, I still do enjoy playing the game. And yes, I know you can always play old editions, and I am purposefully collecting every 3rd edition codex so that I can always play 3rd edition into perpetuity, but that's beside the point. I don't want to collect an old Hammer army and only have the one army and constantly try to find people to play with. I wanted a modern Imperial Guard army, and that's not going to happen. Since that's not going to happen, I am out entirely. All right, that's going to bring us to my own personal #1 most wanted army or new faction. And this one is truly new as a standalone faction, and that is Grots. Yes, I want an entire Grot army. How did you not see this coming from a million miles away? Viva da Revolution! The Grots will rise up against their orc overlords, as all of my Grots tell me every single day. So actually having an army like that would be super duper rad. I would love an entire Grot army. Now I know we can kit bash. There's Grot Guard. There's 3 Grots in a trench coat pretending to be a war boss. I get it. They're all awesome. I do enjoy all of that. But what I want to see is actual Grots be a full standalone army. And this is not out of the realm of possibility. In Age of Sigmar, the goblins actually have split off and now have multiple factions within their army, because now you can run all those guys that have the spiders and the wolves and stuff that are all goblins. They don't even take any orcs with them whatsoever. And it's been a really popular faction, not just like on the tabletop, but like people buying them, the minis. And you saw the Golden Demon most recently, a whole bunch of the winners came out of that faction's releases. So clearly people like the whole aesthetic of having the Grots be in battle. So why not bring it to 40k as well? There's definitely the lore for it. I mean, my gosh, every single the Red Gobbo, model and book that's ever come out, not to mention all the orc books, they all have stuff from the view of the Grots, and the Grots talking about overthrowing and stuff. It makes sense. It's great in the lore, and it would be fantastic on the tabletop. And there's plenty of units. I mean, Killicans are driven by Grots. Grot tanks from Forge World were a thing. Grot Mega Tank was a thing. Obviously you've got squads of Grots. You can bring squigs into it and have a bunch of squigs running around. There's no reason why you can't do an entire Grot army and have it be amazing and really flush out the faction. I would love nothing more than to see Grots really make a headway like that. Again, if that came out, all my money right away, no question, I would get all the Grots and have a Grot army to go with my orc army, even if I couldn't use them together. Even if they were completely separate forces, I would still be all in. In fact, I think I might even prefer it to be completely separate forces, if I'm entirely honest, because that would just be so cool. And I would love to play them head to head with each other, let the Grots actually play the Grots, And yeah, I mean, just how much fun would that be? So that's my personal top 5 most wanted new armies. All right, that's going to do it for this video. It was a really long one, but again, lots of notes on this one, lots of research went into this one, and it ended up being a really, really interesting thing to think about. Because again, I'm really trying to focus on truly new factions or armies coming back that have been gone for a really long time, instead of just yet another Space Marine chapter or, you know, yet another sub-faction of something already existing and just kind of fleshing it out. I know some of those do kind of toe that line a little bit, but I do think that they are truly different enough to stand on their own 2 feet. Or 4 feet, you know, if you're an Exodite riding a 4-footed dinosaur. It depends. But you know what I'm talking about. Let me know, were there anything, you know, any factions, any armies that I missed for any of the games, whether ones that had already come out or ones that people are talking about? Throw them down in the comments below, or your own. If you've got your own top 5 list, or even top 1, let me know what that is. I'd love to have discussions about it. I know there's armies out there that I don't think of or haven't thought of or haven't seen anything on that could be a really, really, really cool modeling opportunity. Because you guys know I'm all in this for the models and the building and the painting and the fun. So hey, let's get into that, right? So yeah, there we go. There's the list. You tell me yours down in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next video. And until then, walk on!